The first thing I noticed was the empty space on the pegboard. It was small at first, just a gap where my socket set used to hang. For a second I thought maybe I had moved it the last time I worked in the shed and forgotten about it. But then I saw the other spaces, the impact driver, the larger wrench kit, the box with the torque tools I had saved for almost a year to buy. All gone. I stood there for a while looking at the wall, trying to remember if I had loaned anything out recently. I rarely did that, but sometimes neighbors asked. Nothing came to mind. The shed still smelled like sawdust and motor oil, the way it always had. The workbench was the same. The old radio sat in the corner where it had been for years. But pieces were missing, enough pieces that the silence in the room started to feel deliberate. I walked back toward the house. Inside, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother had paperwork spread out in front of her. My father was scrolling through something on his phone. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. I leaned against the doorway. "Where are my tools?" My father didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was calm, almost instructional. "We sold some of them." For a second I thought I'd misheard him. "You sold them." My mother shifted the papers slightly, like she was organizing something important. "It's for your brother," she said. The explanation was delivered with the same tone people use when describing a sensible household decision. His law school tuition deposit was due this week. My father added, "We needed to move quickly." I stood there, letting the sentence settle. The tools on that wall weren't decorations. Most of them had been bought one at a time over years. Extra weekend shifts, small construction jobs, repairs for neighbors. They were how I worked. "You didn't ask me?" I said. My father shrugged slightly. "You live under my roof," he said. "You'll contribute." The words weren't angry. That's what made them heavier. They sounded like a rule that had always existed. My mother added quietly, "Your brother's future is important." That part wasn't new either. Growing up, my brother's plans were always described like that. Investments, opportunities. The kind of things the whole family should support. My work had never been framed the same way. Fixing engines, rebuilding decks, small contract jobs. Temporary, my parents used to call it. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I could hear something final in the way they had already decided the outcome. The conversation was over before it started. I went back outside and walked slowly toward the shed again. The evening air had cooled a little. The yard was quiet except for the faint sound of traffic from the road a few blocks away. Inside the workshop, the empty spaces on the pegboard looked larger now. I ran my hand along the workbench. The surface was scratched from years of projects, small burn marks from a soldering iron, a dent where a heavy vise had slipped once. This place had taken time to build, piece by piece, and suddenly it didn't feel like mine anymore. That night I didn't sleep much. Around midnight I turned on the small light in the shed and started opening drawers. The tools they hadn't sold were still there. My compressor, my welding setup, several of the larger power tools that were harder to move quickly. I stood there for a long time thinking about the sentence my father had used. "You live under my roof." The words kept circling back. Eventually I went inside and grabbed a few duffel bags from my closet. The house was quiet. My parents had gone to bed hours earlier. I packed slowly, clothes first, a few documents, the small box where I kept receipts for my equipment. Then I went back to the shed. Loading the truck took most of the night. Some tools were heavy enough that I had to move them carefully down the short ramp I used for equipment deliveries. Each trip felt less emotional than the last. More practical. By 3 in the morning the workshop shelves were mostly empty. Not vandalized, just cleared. Before closing the doors, I looked around one last time. The pegboard still showed the faint outlines where tools had hung for years. For the first time, the space felt like a storage room instead of a workshop. I turned off the light and shut the door. The drive across town was quiet. I had signed the lease on a small garage space a week earlier. At the time it had just seemed like a good step toward working independently. Now it felt like something else. When I rolled up the metal door that morning, the inside smelled like dust and fresh paint. The room was smaller than the shed at home, but it had solid walls, good lighting, and enough outlets to run my equipment. I started unloading, workbench first, then the compressor, then the rest. By sunrise, the tools were arranged along one wall. Not perfectly organized yet, but functional. My phone buzzed around 8. I didn't answer. A few minutes later it buzzed again. Then again. Eventually I checked the message. It was from my father. "Where are you?" A second message followed almost immediately. Then another. The last one came with a voicemail notification. I listened to it. In the background I could hear the shed door creaking open. Then my father's voice, louder than usual. Emptied the entire workshop overnight. I sat down on the edge of the new workbench and looked around the garage. The tools were all here, not stolen, not sold, just moved. For the first time in years, every piece of equipment I owned was in a place no one else had decided for me. I didn't call back right away. Instead I picked up a wrench and began tightening the bolts on the workbench legs. Outside, the morning traffic started to build. Inside the garage, the tools sounded exactly the way they always had when work was about to begin.